You're standing over a body. It's 100,000 BC. There's no ritual, no religion, no priest, no protocol. Just you, the people you love, and someone who was alive this morning and isn't anymore. And at some point, nobody planned this. Nobody decided this. Someone picked up a handful of dirt, and everything changed. That moment, whenever it happened, wherever it happened, whoever did it first, is one of the most consequential acts in the entire history of our species. Not because of what it did for the dead, but because of what it reveals about the living. The decision to bury your dead isn't a practical one. It's not efficient. It's not hygienic in any ancient sense. It costs time and energy that a species fighting daily for survival could absolutely not afford to waste. And yet here we are. Every human civilization that has ever existed in every corner of the planet, across every culture and language and belief system, has done some version of this. Has looked at a body and decided it deserved something more than just being left behind. So the question isn't really why we bury the dead. The question is what kind of mind had to exist before that was even possible. And the answer to that question reaches into the deepest, strangest, most unsettling parts of what it means to be human. By the end of this video, I promise you'll think about death and about your own mind in a way you haven't before. Let's go. First, let's establish something that most people don't fully appreciate. Burial is not instinct. Nothing about the human body or brain automatically generates the impulse to cover a dead person with earth. Plenty of animals show grief responses. Elephants linger near their dead. Chimps carry deceased infants for days, sometimes weeks, unwilling to let go. Dolphins have been observed nudging the bodies of dead calves to the surface repeatedly, trying to get them to breathe. These behaviors are real. They are moving. They suggest genuine emotional processing of loss. But none of those animals bury anything. None of them dig a hole, place the body inside, and cover it over. That specific sequence of actions requires something those animals don't quite have, or at least don't have in the same configuration we do. It requires the ability to understand that death is permanent, that the person is not coming back, and that despite that permanence, or maybe because of it, something should be done, something deliberate, something that costs you. That combination, understanding finality and choosing to respond to it with effort and intention, is extraordinarily rare in the animal kingdom. And for a long time, scientists assumed it was exclusively human. Then the Neanderthals complicated everything. Around 60,000 years ago in a cave called Shanidar in what is now northern Iraq, a Neanderthal was buried. Not just left in a cave, buried. The body was placed in a deliberate position. And when archaeologists excavated the site in the 1950s, they found something that stopped the entire field cold. Clustered around the skeleton, concentrated in a pattern that looked nothing like random soil contamination, was pollen. Lots of it. From multiple flowering plant species, several of which had known medicinal properties. The interpretation that swept through the scientific world was electric. Neanderthals had placed flowers on a grave 60,000 years ago. A species that wasn't even Homo sapiens had performed something that looked disturbingly, unmistakably like a funeral.
Now, here's where science does what science should do. It got complicated. Subsequent researchers pointed out that the pollen concentrations could have been introduced by burrowing rodents that nest in caves and carry plant material inside. The flower burial theory has been seriously challenged and the debate is genuinely unresolved. But here's what isn't unresolved. The deliberate burial itself, the intentional placement of the body. That part holds up. Shanidar isn't the only site. Neanderthal burials have been identified across Europe and the Middle East. La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, Kibera Cave in Israel, Teshik-Tash in Uzbekistan. Multiple sites, multiple continents, multiple independent instances of Neanderthals choosing to put their dead in the ground, which forces a question that is genuinely uncomfortable for anyone who likes clean categories. If Neanderthals buried their dead, what exactly are we saying about Neanderthal minds? Because burial, even without flowers, even without ceremony, still requires that cognitive package we just described. Understanding permanence. Choosing deliberate action in response to it. And Neanderthals were doing it. Tens of thousands of years before our species shows up in the European archaeological record. Let's pause here because there's a legitimate scientific tension worth addressing. Some researchers argue that what we're calling Neanderthal burial is being overinterpreted. That placing a body in a depression in a cave floor isn't necessarily ceremonial. That it might be practical. Keeping predators away from camp, reducing the smell, managing a biological problem in a confined living space. And that reading grief or ritual into that behavior tells us more about our desire to see ourselves in our ancient relatives than it does about actual Neanderthal psychology. That's a fair argument, it deserves respect. But here's where it runs into trouble. Because the earliest unambiguous Homo sapiens burials don't just involve putting a body in the ground. They involve doing things to the body and around the body that have zero practical explanation whatsoever. At a site called Sungir in Russia, dating to around 34,000 years ago, archaeologists found two children buried head-to-head in a single grave. And what was buried with them is one of the most extraordinary things in the entire prehistoric record. More than 10,000 mammoth ivory beads, carefully carved, each one requiring roughly 45 minutes of skilled labor to produce, placed in patterns on the bodies that suggest they were sewn onto clothing, fox teeth, carved animal figurines, ivory lances, a human femur filled with red ochre, placed alongside one of the children. Do the math on the beads alone. 10,000 beads at 45 minutes each is 7,500 hours of labor, dedicated entirely to adorning two dead children. In a world where every hour of human effort was a survival calculation, where food, shelter, warmth, and safety were never guaranteed, a community poured 7,500 hours into honoring two people who could no longer benefit from anything. That is not practical. That is not pest control. That is not managing a biological problem in a confined space. That is something else entirely. That is a community that believed, on some level, that what happened after death mattered. That the dead had somewhere to go, or something to become, or someone to meet. That the living had obligations to the departed that didn't end when the breathing stopped. You cannot produce Sungir without an afterlife concept. You cannot produce Sungir without storytelling, without shared belief, without the ability to imagine a world beyond the one you can see and touch and survive inside. Sungir isn't just a burial site. It's evidence of a fully modern human mind operating at full philosophical capacity 34,000 years ago. And it makes you wonder what the burials we haven't found yet looked like. But let's go back further, because the oldest confirmed Homo sapiens burial predates Sungir by a significant margin. At a site called Jebel Ir-Hod in Morocco, evidence suggests deliberate burial practices around 100,000 years ago. At Border Cave in South Africa, an infant was buried with a perforated shell, possibly a personal ornament, dating to roughly the same period. These are sparse. The evidence is fragmentary and some of it contested. But the picture they paint, even conservatively interpreted, is of a species that was grappling with death in a non-practical, non-instinctual way from its very earliest chapters. So why? What drove this? Where did the impulse come from? Here's where the story gets genuinely strange. One of the most compelling theories isn't about grief at all. It's about fear, specifically, fear of the dead. There's a phenomenon that anthropologists have documented across dozens of unconnected cultures around the world. The belief that the dead, if not properly handled, become dangerous, that spirits of the deceased linger near the body, that they can cause illness, bad luck, failed hunts, conflict within the group, that they need to be appeased, contained, sent away. And the way you send them away, the way you seal that boundary between the living and the dead, is through ritual, through burial, through ceremony that formally closes the door between this world and whatever comes next. This pattern appears in cultures that had zero contact with each other, in indigenous Australian traditions, in ancient Mesopotamian beliefs, in early Chinese ancestor veneration practices, in the burial customs of the Andean highlands. Separated by oceans and millennia, humans kept arriving at the same basic conclusion. The dead need to be dealt with properly, or they become a problem. Now, this might sound like superstition dressed up as anthropology, but here's the thing. In a world without germ theory, without any understanding of how disease actually spreads, the people who treated dead bodies with caution and put them in the ground quickly, and surrounded that process with protective ritual, probably did better than the ones who didn't. Not because the ritual itself had any magical effect, but because the behavior the ritual enforced, distance from decomposing bodies, designated areas for the dead outside the living space, communal protocols for handling remains, those behaviors genuinely reduced disease transmission. The ritual protected the living even if none of them understood the mechanism. What started as fear became wisdom encoded in ceremony, and ceremony became culture, and culture became the thing that separated the groups who survived from the ones who didn't. There's another layer to this that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Burial is a social technology, not just for managing the dead, for managing the living. Think about what a shared burial does for a group. It creates a moment where everyone stops, everyone participates, everyone witnesses the same thing together. Grief is synchronized. The loss is made communal rather than individual. And in that communal grief, something happens neurologically that is only recently being understood. Shared emotional experiences, especially intense ones, increase oxytocin release, strengthen social bonds, and create a sense of collective identity that is extraordinarily difficult to build any other way. A funeral isn't just a farewell, it's a group recalibration. It's the community reminding itself that it is a community. That these specific people, in this specific place, belong to each other, and for a small band of humans trying to survive in a world that wanted to kill them. That sense of belonging, that reinforced social cohesion, was not a luxury. It was a survival mechanism wearing ceremonial clothing. The grave goods at Sungir weren't just for the children. They were for everyone who participated in placing them there. The act of collectively honoring the dead built the kind of trust and group identity that let those same people face a mammoth together the next morning. And then there's the deepest explanation, the one that sits underneath all the others and makes all of them possible. Theory of mind. The theory of mind is the cognitive ability to understand that other people have inner lives, that they have experiences, feelings, perspectives that are separate from your own. It sounds obvious. It is not obvious. It is one of the most sophisticated cognitive achievements in the known universe, and it develops in human children around age 4. Before that, children genuinely cannot fully grasp that another person's mind contains different information than their own. Most animals never develop it fully. Some primates show partial versions. Dolphins show some evidence of it. But the full, rich, recursive version, the ability to think about what someone else is thinking about what you're thinking, that appears to be a largely human specialty. And here's why it matters for burial. You cannot mourn someone properly without theory of mind. You cannot feel the weight of a specific person's absence without having built a detailed internal model of who that person was. Their habits, their voice, their particular way of doing things, the specific texture of your relationship with them. That model lives in your mind, and when the person dies, the model remains. You keep running simulations of someone who no longer exists. You hear a sound and think they would have laughed at that. You see something and reach for them to show them before you remember. Grief is theory of mind running on empty. It's the software outliving the hardware. Burial might be, at its most fundamental level, a response to that experience. A way of giving the persistent internal model somewhere to go. A physical location for the ongoing relationship with someone who is no longer physically present. The grave isn't for the dead. It never was. It's for the living mind that cannot stop thinking about them. Here's the honest part of this story. We don't know exactly when burial began. We probably never will. Organic material disappears. Wooden grave markers rot. Flowers dissolve. Most of the burials that ever happened left no trace the earth was willing to keep. The archaeological record is not a complete picture. It's fragments of a picture, mostly missing, occasionally extraordinary. What we can say is this. By at least 100,000 years ago, and possibly considerably earlier, some humans were choosing to put their dead in the ground with intention and care. By 60,000 years ago, Neanderthals were doing something similar. By 34,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were doing it with a sophistication and investment that implies a fully developed symbolic world, afterlife beliefs, complex social ritual, and a relationship with death that looks not entirely unlike our own. The specific forms changed. The beliefs changed. The grave goods changed. But the underlying impulse, the refusal to simply walk away, the insistence that this person and this loss deserved acknowledgement, that has been with us longer than agriculture, longer than language as we understand it, possibly longer than our species in its current form. There's something quietly staggering about that. Every funeral you have ever attended, every grave you have ever stood beside, every moment you have ever spent thinking about someone you've lost, you were participating in something that stretches back further than civilization, further than writing, further than the wheel or the city or the nation or any of the structures we use to organize human life. The oldest thing about us might not be our tools. It might not be our language. It might be this: the refusal to let the people we love simply disappear. The insistence that their absence means something, that it deserves dirt and time and tears and effort and occasionally 10,000 mammoth ivory beads. The first person who ever picked up a handful of earth and placed it over someone they loved had no word for what they were doing, no tradition to follow, no priest to guide them. They were inventing something from scratch, out of grief, out of love, out of a mind sophisticated enough to feel the full unbearable weight of a permanent goodbye. And somehow, across 100,000 years and every possible variation of human culture and belief and geography, we never stopped.